Welcome to this episode of the Good for America podcast. I'm former Congressman Bob Good, former chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the podcast, follow me on social media, rate the show, and share it with your friends. The subject of today's podcast is Trump on amnesty and immigration. Trump on amnesty and immigration. For 4 years during the Biden administration, when Democrats had full control of government, they worked intentionally, deliberately to transform America by flooding our country with millions of non-Americans, illegal alien invaders. This was their purpose. This was their mission. This was deliberate on their behalf. And all Democrats in Washington were complicit in this, participated in this with their support for Biden's policies carried out by Department of Homeland Insecurity Secretary Mayorkas. These were flooding again the country with illegals who don't speak our language, who don't know or respect our laws, who haven't earned their citizenship, they don't have citizenship, of course, or demonstrated they can contribute to our society, contribute to our country, and make us stronger. They are not familiar with or much less devoted to our Constitution, the highest law of the land. They haven't embraced our values or our culture. And the Democrats' goals seem to be to make us eventually no longer America. Why else would you flood the country with millions of non-Americans, millions of illegal alien invaders, unless you want it to transform, to change America, where at some point, as you flood just tens of millions of illegal aliens, non-citizens into the country, you no longer are America. And I think the reason is because Democrats want power at all costs. They presume that these are undocumented Democrats, unregistered Democrats who will vote for them and help them to retain power. And Democrats, of course, don't care about the impact on Americans. They don't care about the stress on our housing, our education system, our social services, our health care, public safety. Democrats don't believe in American sovereignty. They don't believe in American exceptionalism. In other words, that's what makes us exceptional in the world, that sitting on a shining hill, that light to the world. They don't believe that there is an America worth preserving. As a matter of fact, they want to destroy what America is and transform it into something unrecognizable. Why else would they do what they did during the 4 years of the Biden administration? The fact is, Democrats believe that everyone around the world has the right to come to America, to be in America, whether legally or illegally. That's over 7 billion people that don't live here. There's a little over 300 million people living in America. So about 95% of the world's population doesn't live here. And the Democrats believe that without any limits, those 7 billion plus, those 95% of the world's population that are not Americans have the right to come here, to live here, to be here, whether legally or illegally. And once they get here, of course, Democrats believe they should be able to stay here unconditionally as well. And you've seen that over the past 6 months since Republicans took full control of the federal government, as Democrats have stood up and fought for the worst, most dangerous, most criminal illegal aliens who are among us, trying to keep them in the country or bring them back to the country. This was an issue I focused on relentlessly during my 4 years in Washington. I made 6 trips to the border. I recognized that Virginia was not geographically a border state, but the Biden and Democrat policies effectively essentially made every state a border state, made every town a border town, as all Americans to varying degrees suffered and are suffering under the consequence of the Biden Democrat border invasion. And all of them are complicit in it. Virginia's 2 senators, Warner and Kane, no matter how moderate or reasonable they may talk, Abigail Spanberger, who wants to be the next governor of Virginia, and all Democrats. The Democrat Party is currently divided between the far left Democrats and the extreme far left Democrats. But I made 6 trips to the border during my 4 years. I did countless speeches on the issue of the border invasion and America First immigration policies. I made countless can participate in countless press conferences and hearings to expose the Biden border invasion, sponsored and co-sponsored dozens of pieces of legislation. I even fought for Republicans to shut down the government when we had the House during my last 2 years under former Speaker McCarthy and current Speaker Johnson to say, why would we continue to fund the Biden border invasion, to keep giving Mayorkas and his Department of Homeland Security the money to perpetuate, to facilitate, to continue the border invasion? Why would we keep giving the money? I've often said, again, it's always and only about the money in Congress, in Washington. It's all about what you fund or what you don't fund. It's all noise other than that in Congress. If you're not willing to cut off the funding, to defund something, and if you continue to fund something, then you're supporting it, but it's all about the money. And so I fought to try to shut down the government and refused to give Schumer and Biden and Mayorkas the money to keep facilitating the border invasion. But I only got lip service from Kevin McCarthy and Mike Johnson, the current speaker. They refused to fight, to go to the mat, to go to the wall, if you will. And they just kept giving Democrats the money, and 2/3 of Republicans joined in and voted to keep giving them the money. So thank God, though, thank God, as we all know, for the election results back in November, now 8 months ago, and for the changes that President Trump and his administration under Border Czar Holman and Secretary Kristi Noem, Homeland Security Secretary, the things that they have done, the executive actions, the actions by this administration to pause the border invasion, to largely stop, at least temporarily, the border invasion. It's incredible the speed and the effectiveness and the efficiency, as they've demonstrated that it just takes the will of the president to stop it and the will of the administration to stop it. But it is just a pause, hopefully a 4-year pause at a minimum, but it's just a pause without congressional action and things like completing the border wall and codifying into law the policies that were not codified into law during the first Trump administration and have not been codified into law yet during this administration. It's not just about throwing more money at the problem, except for the wall completion. I'm glad that the president seems committed to that. Republicans seem committed to that. But the threat remains regarding the unvetted and dangerous individuals who are here within our country as a result of the Biden border invasion, the Democrat border invasion. Not to mention, again, there's just problems with millions of more illegal non-Americans living in our country. We must be resolved and resolute in holding President Trump accountable to do what he said he would do. Multiple times over, for months during the 24 campaign, he promised he would deport all illegal aliens. We must not allow him or Republicans to back away from that. They ran on that. They promised that. It's an overwhelming issue. The polls show some 75-80% of Americans want all illegals deported. And it was a large part of it, the foundational part of the Trump campaign in 24. We cannot let him cave and reverse course at the first sign of resistance from Big Farm, from Big Hospitality, who want their farm workers and their restaurant and hotel workers, or the Chamber of Commerce Republicans. If you allow the president, the administration, to carve out certain industries, certain segments of the workforce to not have to meet the standard of being legal in this country, then you're going to have the most dangerous illegals, the ones with the terrorist ties, the criminal backgrounds, the gang members, the traffickers who brought the drugs and the women and the children into the country. They would just flock to these industries for safety. And where do you draw the line? How about why some industries, not others? President Trump, you've probably noticed, because of pushback and resistance from much of conservative world, has begun to call it a work program that he wants to implement. Not amnesty, he says, a work program. That's what Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins, who most people believe it does support amnesty, they're calling it a work program. And admittedly, part of the problem is there's not, at this moment, enough willing American workers to do some of the tasks that illegals are doing here in the country. But part of that problem is that the federal government continues to pay tens of millions of Americans not to work. Democrats particularly during the Biden administration, particularly during and after COVID, removed all work requirements for federal subsistence, for welfare, essentially SNAP or food stamps, housing assistance, Medicaid or insurance, cash welfare. And the estimates are in the range of $80,000 per family they can get in federal assistance without work requirements. This was a massive expansion of the welfare state, the dependent class, during the Biden administration, during and after COVID. And frankly, it was difficult, even as a member of Congress, it was difficult and is difficult to know who is getting how much money. And sadly and unconscionably, many Republicans have fought reinstating the work requirements for those who are getting federal subsistence. You saw that in the recent big ugly bill, where some Republicans fought against the Medicaid and food stamp work requirements. Those were watered down and weakened in the bill. A couple of Republicans in the Senate and Republican in the House didn't vote for the bill because of that. But we ought to be requiring all able-bodied, working age, all able-bodied, healthy, working age individuals to work in exchange for receiving any temporary federal assistance, any temporary welfare, whether it's food stamps, whether it's housing subsistence, whether it's Medicaid, or whether it's cash welfare itself. Hunger and fear are necessary motivations. Hunger and fear are necessary motivations, meaning that hey, if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't work, then you're going to lose things. You're not going to have the things that you need. That is a biblical principle. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, the Apostle Paul wrote to the church at Thessalonica. He said, talking about himself and his colleagues when they were there serving that church, he said, "Nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labor and toil night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you, not because we do not have authority, but to make ourselves an example of how you should follow us. For even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat." So the Apostle Paul, who was primarily an evangelist, worked. Bible says that he was a tent maker, but he worked, he said, worked with labor and toil night and day, not to be a burden to others. You saw this biblical principle applied by the leader of the first colony, English colony in America in the early 1600s, when the leader, Captain John Smith, is famously reported to have said that if someone doesn't work, they shall not eat. Everybody had to work so that the colony would survive and that the people would survive in those early 1600s. It's a simple principle. You can't have more people riding in the wagon instead of pulling the wagon. It just doesn't work. And deporting illegals will incentivize our farmers to innovate. Deporting illegals will incentivize farmers to innovate when they don't have that cheap foreign labor. Deporting illegals will incentivize paying higher wages. Guest workers are not a good solution. We don't need more of the H-2 visas. That is not a good solution where these people come here for 9-10 months of the year, every year. They leave their families. The farmers have to put them up with housing and transportation and feed them and all of that. And that's not a great solution. But illegal workers are even worse. Again, these are people who didn't earn citizenship. They didn't demonstrate their merit or ability to contribute to our society. They didn't demonstrate their trustworthiness or their allegiance to our country. They didn't renounce allegiance to their home country. They didn't assimilate and embrace our culture. They didn't demonstrate proficiency in English. And rewarding those who came here illegally incentivizes more illegals. Rewarding them with worker status or amnesty or citizenship, rewarding that incentivizes more illegals coming. And rewarding those who hire illegals incentivizes hiring more illegals and more illegals coming to our country. It's wrong and it hurts the American workers. It's a problem, again, to grow the non-American population in our country. Illegals are residents. They're not Americans. And it matters what is your view of government to be in this country. The illegals didn't come, most of them, from democracies like ours. They don't understand or necessarily support our form of government. They simply know our country's better than their country. That's why they came. Or they simply want to have what we have. And, or it's even worse than that. And some came during the Biden border invasion with more nefarious, malicious, dangerous intent. But a unified country is important in terms of having a population, a citizenry that loves the country, that pledges allegiance to America, that where everyone who's in this country has renounced their allegiance to any other country. They respect the rule of law. They respect the sanctity of life. They respect our founding principles, our founding Judeo-Christian principles. They've pledged allegiance to our Constitution and our form of government. It's already a problem in our country when the Democrat half of the country is suspect on these issues. It's sad today that when you drive down the road and you see an American flag flying, you got what, about a 95% probability that person votes Republican. Isn't that sad? It used to be that patriotism and devotion to the American flag and love of this country was bipartisan, and that Democrats shared those same feelings. But that's not true largely today. And it's critical that America remains a country where the vast majority of our residents are Americans, are American citizens. And Americans are those who are legally born here to Americans. I'm glad that the president is fighting on the abuse and misuse of the 14th Amendment with respect to birthright citizenship. You shouldn't be able to become a U.S. citizen because you were here and born to a parent who was here illegally. That's not what was intended with that 14th Amendment, because those illegals are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, as it says in the 14th Amendment. Americans are those who've legally earned their citizenship through the naturalization process or were born here legally, of course, and illegal residents are not Americans. But unfortunately, with all the great work that President Trump is doing on the border situation, we're not arresting and deporting enough. We're only arresting and deporting somewhere around 1,000 a day. And just do the math on that. That means we would only arrest and deport a few 100,000 a year. That's not nearly enough when the Biden Democrat border invasion brought in some 15 million over the past 4 years. And we've got some 30 million or so. It's, again, hard to know what the real number is, but some estimated 30 million or so illegal aliens living in this country. According to last year's census, we've got 50 million people living in this country who were not born here. So that's going to be some 30 million illegals who are here and some 20 million who've become citizens through the naturalization process. But about 16% of our population was not born in the United States, again, counting illegals and immigrants. And we have the highest percentage of foreign-born residents in our nation's history. I hope you recognize that as a problem when such a large percentage of your country was not born in this country. And that exceeds the previous high from the late 19th century and the late 1800s. And Biden was growing the non-US born population by about 5% a year, and some 20% over his 4 years did it increase by. And that included hundreds of thousands from adversarial Middle Eastern countries and hundreds of thousands from China. We had record levels of illegals come from the Middle East and from China. And for that matter, illegals are always undercounted in the surveys and the census because they're often afraid to answer those questions. The Center for Immigration Studies reports that less than half of the new arrivals, mostly the illegals who came into this country under Biden, less than half of them are working. That 46%, based on the Center for Immigration Studies, are actually working in this country. So that repudiates the narrative that we need illegals and more immigrants for the labor force, because the majority of those who came during the Biden administration, again, are not working. They're either senior citizens, they're children, they're caregivers of children, or they're just frankly dependent on the government. Further stressing, again, our social services, our healthcare agencies, our education system, our law enforcement, and the elites, who tend to be the Democrats now, the elites, the wealthy, the higher income folks, they do better with more immigrants, more illegals here. That's why they're in favor of that. But lower income folks suffer from wage depression, competition for lower level, entry level jobs, fewer available jobs as illegals take those jobs, worse schools for their children. They can't afford to send their kids to the elite private schools, more crime in their neighborhoods, worse health care as the healthcare systems are stressed by the illegals and non-citizens that are here, fewer social services available, welfare resources for those who truly need them, because the Democrats took away proof of citizenship or citizenship requirement for illegals to get social services. Again, that includes cash welfare, food stamps, housing subsistence, and Medicaid or insurance for and the pie is just divided by more people as you have more illegals here, more non-citizens here, taking things that should be restricted to just Americans who truly need them. So we cannot allow the president to not follow through on his commitment to deport all illegals. But those who followed President Trump's history and remember from the first term should not be totally surprised at his reversal on amnesty or a work program for illegals who are in certain industries, again, hospitality, hotels, restaurants, or farms. And I also question whether or not he will support the current proposed amnesty legislation from the very liberal Republican Maria Salazar from Florida. She tried this in the last Congress when Democrats at the Senate and the White House. She's trying to get an amnesty bill brought up for a vote in Congress. This shouldn't stand a chance when Republicans control all of government. And Speaker Johnson should not allow that bill to come to the floor for a vote. And hopefully no Republican would support that. And hopefully it would be able to get to the Republican Senate. And hopefully President Trump wouldn't support that, but he needs to hear from us. But I'm going to just give you a little bit of history. In Trump's first term on the issue of immigration and illegals and amnesty, that in 2018, a little almost halfway through the president's first term, in early 2018, in February of 2018, President Trump endorsed Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley's Secure and Succeed Act. This was an amnesty bill. President Trump said about the bill that the Grassley bill accomplishes, as a quote, the Grassley bill accomplishes the 4 pillars of the White House framework, a lasting solution on DACA. Let me pause a second. DACA is Obama's Dreamers. That's the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals. That's for the children who came here as illegals, whose parents were illegals, and how Obama wanted to try to allow them to stay permanently. Well, President Trump supported allowing them to stay permanently. So let me go back to the bill. President Trump said about the bill, the Grassley bill accomplishes the 4 pillars of the White House framework, a lasting solution on DACA, ending chain migration, canceling the visa lottery, and securing the border through building the wall and closing legal loopholes. I'm asking all senators in both parties to support the Grassley bill and to oppose any legislation that fails to fulfill these 4 pillars, end quote. So President Trump, there were some good things in the bill that he mentions, but he said, don't support a bill that doesn't provide a lasting solution for DACA. These nearly 1 million illegals who came here as children who President Trump wanted to give amnesty to. And then Grassley himself said about the bill that the Secure Act provided a generous and permanent solution for up to 2 million, 1.8 million DACA or DACA eligible recipients, an earned path to citizenship for these young people. So the Grassley bill wanted to make citizens 2 million illegals, and President Trump supported it. Then a month later, in March of 2018, when the Republican Congress passed a $1.3 trillion omnibus package that only provided $1.5 billion for the wall, not nearly enough. That's part of the reason why the wall didn't get completed in Trump's first term. But Trump threatened to veto it over not the massive cost of the $1.3 trillion omnibus bill, but for not having enough amnesty in it for undocumented immigrants. President Trump tweeted, again, this is March of 2018, about the bill, I am considering a veto of the omnibus spending bill based on the fact that the 800,000 plus DACA recipients have been totally abandoned. They're not even mentioned in the bill. So President Trump, he did end up signing the bill, but he almost vetoed it because he didn't like that it didn't provide citizenship to these up to 2 million illegals. 3 months later, in June of 18, you might remember, this was when Paul Ryan was the speaker. You might remember how there was the Goodlatte bills. The former congressman, longtime congressman from Virginia in the 6th District, Bob Goodlatte, he authored a bill called Goodlatte 1, which was a strong immigration border bill that didn't provide amnesty, but did do a lot of good things. And Paul Ryan derailed that bill. As a speaker, and in June of 2018, Paul Ryan and President Trump supported a separate bill, what was called Goodlatte 2, which was an amnesty bill with the path to citizenship for 2 million illegals. And again, Ryan blocked Goodlatte 1, the strong bill, and supported instead Goodlatte 2, and Trump supported Goodlatte 2 also, the one that was the compromise bill that provided 2 million for illegals. This is when Republicans controlled all of government in the first half of Trump's term. They had the Senate, they had the White House, of course, with President Trump, and they had the House under Paul Ryan. On the morning of June 27 of 2018, President Trump tweeted out at 7:39 a.m. in all caps, like he likes to do, House Republicans should pass the strong but fair immigration bill known as Goodlatte 2 in their afternoon vote today. Thankfully, Trump's pressure campaign on conservatives to support the mass amnesty bill didn't work. It failed. It didn't pass. And afterwards, Trump did what he does. He doesn't like to admit when he's wrong. He tried to downplay his support for the bill and to reduce criticism of himself on amnesty and border security. And 3 days later, on June 30 of 2018, President Trump tweeted, "I never pushed Republicans in the House to vote for the immigration bill, either Goodlatte 1 or Goodlatte 2. That contradicts with the other tweet. Because it could never have gotten enough Democrats as long as there's a 60-vote threshold in the Senate. I released many of them prior to the vote, knowing we need more Republicans to win in November." So referring to the midterms. So President Trump admitted that he never wanted Republicans to really try to secure the border because it wasn't as important as winning an election. Again, is anything sacred for Republicans or more important than winning? What is winning? What is winning if it means amnesty, if it means not securing the border? And Trump and Ryan, by not supporting and pushing for Goodlatte 1 and trying to pressure all Republicans to vote and support that, and instead pushing Goodlatte 2, the bad bill that ultimately failed, they helped facilitate the worst border crisis we've ever had by failing to codify President Trump's good executive actions in his first term with the legislation that was Goodlatte 1. And again, we're still suffering under this border invasion and the real threat that has still not been revealed. I've said this many, many times, but we really don't know who's in our country and how much harm they intend to perpetrate upon us. Only time will tell. Trump's current border policies can be reversed immediately with the next Democrat president, meaning the work that President Trump has done to eliminate the border invasion. He's done great work to that effect, but that can easily be reversed by the next Democrat president as it stands now. Just imagine or envision hundreds of thousands of illegals at the border in January of 29 wearing Gavin Newsom t-shirts, just like they did 4.5 years ago when they're wearing their Joe Biden t-shirts. That's what our future looks like if we were to lose the 28 election. And in the meantime, between now and then, that Congress doesn't codify President Trump's policies. And if we do an amnesty, bill and call it a work program, we'll be betraying the trust of the American people who voted in President Trump and gave Republicans full control of government. That's why we got to deport thousands a day and millions a year, not just 1,000 a day and a few 100,000 a year. We have to demand that our elected representatives, our Republican elected representatives, speak truth to power and confront the president when he's wrong. No amnesty, no work program for illegals. Deport them all, make them apply for citizenship the legal way and earn their citizenship, pledge their allegiance, demonstrate they can help us and make us stronger. That is the key to keeping the republic. So thanks again for joining me for this episode of the Good for America podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And I ask you again to subscribe to the podcast, follow me on social media at Rep Bob Good, rate this show, and share it with your friends. Let's keep the republic.